Welcome to the Same Day Podcast, where we discuss driving incremental business growth and other topics related to real estate, property management, and entrepreneurship. Now to the show at hand.
Matt Zalk here. I'm the host of the Same Day Podcast, where I connect with top business experts and real estate leaders. Some of our past guests on the show have included Mike Bosch with Atento Capital, talking about some of the great, some of the fun stuff that he's doing in the venture space in Tulsa, helping to grow businesses and bring new businesses to Tulsa. We've also interviewed Brooke Reuter, who was talking about the differences between lease to own and contract for deed, whether you still own the property or whether you've given up the ownership of the property. Today's episode is brought to you by Keyrenter Property Management. At Keyrenter Property Management, we help our clients buy, renovate, and operate real estate assets. That means we're a full-service property management company, and we help our clients build wealth while taking the headache out of property ownership. We've got Alex Abbott, who's a client of ours that we helped buy and renovate it's actually 8 units. Yoni, you know this better than anybody. It's 8 units, 4 duplexes. It was a couple of years ago. And we helped the renovation and we stabilized the portfolio, and it's been performing super well. So that's an example of what Keyrenter does. But that is also why it doesn't matter what you've got, a single family home, a condo, a townhome, an apartment. We've got the management solutions you need. Go to keyrenterpmc.com or email us at info@keyrenterpmc.com. Yoni Schmidt is on the podcast today. I normally like to give a shout out to the people that introduced our guests. In this case, Yoni, you're my wife's first cousin. You've also been involved in the business for a long time. So happy to have you on the show. What's your title?
I am, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. And my title is Regional Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Keyrenter Property Management.
Boom. Beautiful. Love it.
Yeah.
We're going to talk today about some frequently asked questions. These are questions that owners ask us when they're interviewing us for property management services. You don't generally do the property management service sales in the organization. There are a number of business development managers that we have, one in Arkansas, one in Oklahoma City, and one in Tulsa. But you have done it for us in the past before you were, elevated to, supervise the sales function. So you're pretty well versed in our services. You know what's going on. So we've got a bunch of questions that I want to ask you about the services that we provide. But first and foremost, for somebody that doesn't know what a property manager does, tell us about the services, generally speaking, that Keyrenter provides.
Sure. So generally, we are a full service property management company. And what that means is that we will do anything and everything from the moment that you hand over the keys to us to take over the property. And from that moment, as an owner, you can set it and forget it and let us take care of business. We will come in, we'll conduct an initial inspection to understand what, if anything, needs to happen to the property in order to have it meet the local laws and ordinances for the city or municipal region that we are operating in. We will also conduct any repairs, maintenance when the property is vacant. Before we place a tenant, we will do all of the marketing and all of the tenant screening and pre-qualification. Before a tenant is even allowed to come to the property, we pre-qualify that tenant. We coordinate and facilitate all of the showings. We will market the property across 60 different online avenues along with our websites. And we will, of course, place the tenant, we'll screen the tenant, we'll conduct a full 14-point screening check on each and every single one of the applicants that submit an application. And then from there on, we will manage the day-to-day. So that means we will collect the rent, we will handle any maintenance requests and repairs that come in from the tenant, and we will also distribute the rent to the owner and the investors.
So you talked about the owner handing over the keys. Can an owner hand over keys if the property's in shambles? Can the owner hand over keys if it's already tenanted? And what's the difference in the service that we provide in that case or in those cases versus if an owner hands over keys and the property is more or less made ready, is in perfect condition, ready to lease?
Sure. Great question. So the owner can hand over keys in whatever condition the property is in. It could be in complete disarray and shambles, and then we will get our contracting crews out there. We'll get an estimate for the owner, and we'll work with them and alongside them to make the appropriate selections for whatever it is: flooring, paint, fixtures. Generally speaking, we have a standard that we like to see our rental properties, rehabbed to. And we'll follow those standards and kind of follow a certain quality of finishes. So we can definitely take care of any property that's in shambles and rehab it from start to finish, and place a tenant in there and get it cash flowing. From a different perspective, an owner can hand over a property that is completely tenanted. It could be a duplex, for example, that has tenants on both sides. We'll go out to the property, we'll introduce ourselves, we'll post the change in management notices, we will start the relationship with the tenants, and we'll explain to them how they can go online and activate their online tenant portal, where they can submit their maintenance requests, and how to pay their rent. Tenants have about 7 different ways to pay their rent.
So one thing that we see oftentimes is that a landlord, an owner, hands over a property to us, and the tenant then goes, holy moly, there's a new management company in town. They're responsive. They've introduced themselves. I know how to reach them. And they start submitting all sorts of maintenance requests. Some of those we would have known about. The owner says, hey, I've been busy and I've gotten caught up in other stuff, and this isn't my full-time job. And so I've let some of the maintenance defer, and I'd like you to fix the carpets, and I'd like you to fix a threshold on the rear entrance of the kitchen, or however it works. I'm just following your duplex situation where oftentimes there's a rear door off the kitchen. But how do we handle that? How does it work when an owner submits, 5 or 6 maintenance requests right off the bat?
So it really just depends on, the owner and the situation, right? And it also depends on how long the tenant has lived in that unit. If we know for a fact that the tenant has been there for 10 years, then there are certain items that we might not go in and repair right away, if they're not an emergency, or if they're not hindering on the functionality of the property. Meaning, if it's a drawer that fell off the track, we would probably push back onto the tenant and say, we're sorry this is happening, but you should probably go ahead and fix it yourself. Otherwise, we'll have to take this out of your security deposit and fix it when you leave the property. On the flip side, if it's a hot water heater and the tenants don't have any hot water, that would be something that we would bring to the attention of the owner, and then we would ask for the permission to repair this one specific item.
Right. Let's talk for a moment about the leasing process. Can you go into more detail about the actual process, the maintenance inspection that happens if a property is vacant, I should say, and then photographs, getting it marketed, that sort of thing?
Sure. It's a pretty extensive and comprehensive process. So the first thing that happens when an owner brings us a property that is vacant, we will conduct what's called an initial inspection. That inspection is then published to the owner's portal and shared with them, and they can see it as well. That helps us understand what, if anything, needs to be done to the property in order to bring it to our minimum standards. In addition to that, there will be a move-in inspection before the tenant moves in, and that will be compared to the move-out inspection when the tenant moves out, in order to understand and reconcile what needs to be charged to the tenant at the time of move-out from their security deposit. From the leasing perspective, before the tenant is, of course, approved and they are allowed to sign a lease, they would go onto our website, they would find the property that they're interested in, they would click a green button that says schedule a viewing, and then they would go through the process of getting pre-qualified to see the property itself. Once they've been pre-qualified, then they're offered a time to see the property. If they come see the property in person, which we offer showings 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., so we never miss any good leads. Once they come through, they see the property, they're offered 2 things. One is a feedback form to help us understand if there's something that we missed and that the tenants are noticing that needs to be repaired, handled, or fit or taken care of. And then, of course, they're offered an application. If they fill out that application, we will then take that information. We'll start what we call a 14-point screening check on each and every single one of the adult applicants that we would be moving into the property and signing a lease. So we reach out to their current and former landlords, their current and former employers. We cross-reference their name with a national database for sex offenders that we use, a terrorist watch list that we use, all open and closed Oklahoma or Arkansas court records, along with having qualifying conversations with the references that they provide on their application and the tenants themselves or the applicants themselves to understand who they are, where they're coming from, why they're moving, and what the story is. And in addition, we, of course, do a full criminal background check, a full credit check, and we verify their income by the use of either bank statements or pay stubs. The reason we do such an extensive deep dive into who the tenants are is because at Keyrenter, we offer a lease guarantee. So if a tenant has to be evicted or if a tenant skips without paying, we will then guarantee the lease and place a new tenant for free without charging our flat rate leasing fee of $695 for that property.
So what's the difference when we do photos at Keyrenter versus, a mom and pop operator that's doing photos and how it ultimately gets marketed on Zillow?
Sure. That's a really good question. And one that I actually had a conversation with an owner today who is considering bringing us a house in Oklahoma City. Not only did he have really bad marketing quality photos, he also shorted himself about $200 on the rent, and he had no idea. And so I looked at the photos and I looked at the house, and it's a really nice house in Edmond, Oklahoma, and it should probably rent for about $1,750, and he had it at $1,550. In addition, his photos he wasn't putting his best foot forward. And so the difference is when Keyrenter comes in, we have a higher standard for quality of photos, and we know what tenants are looking for. So we really want to make sure that we're using those wider lenses to bring in all the light and showcase the living room and the kitchen and the bathrooms in the best possible way.
Yeah, but I guess in essence, all of our photos are done professionally. We're not using an iPhone to walk through the house. We're not doing any of that sort of stuff. And the origin of that fundamentally was, we used to take photos with the property managers. Property manager would go out with an SLR and that person would take photos. Then we, would face some difficulty in getting them leased. This was going back to 2017, 2018. We'd find that, a property wouldn't move and we'd say, we better get the professional photographer in there to take good photos. We'd get it photographed and all of a sudden it would move. And then ultimately we moved to a process where all of our properties are photographed professionally. We've got probably 6 or 7 different photographers that we use, but fundamentally they're all, shot with professional cameras with lighting that's appropriate, et cetera. And then they, run them through Lightroom or other software systems that really, highlight and make the photos pop. So I love that about our process, and it really sets us apart certainly from the mom and pop landlord, but also from a lot of other property managers that don't do that. They still have their property managers going out and, taking photos with an iPhone or with a small camera or whatever else. So I do love that.
And I should add that the cost of the photos with Keyrenter is not incurred by the owner. So we will cover the cost of the photos, and that's included as part of the leasing fee.
Right. Absolutely. You talked about the lease guarantee. So we will guarantee the full length of the lease, and we'll put somebody in for free if we end up having to evict them, or if they need to leave, in the middle of their lease or whatever. What about the 2-week lease guarantee that we have in our property management agreement?
Sure. So that basically means that we will guarantee that we'll put a tenant in your property within 2 weeks of it hitting the market. You, the owner, of course, will be notified immediately upon the property going live, and you'll be sent a letter from us. It's automated through our system. So without fail, the owner is notified with a link to that listing. And so that's when you know that clock starts. And basically what that means is we will place a tenant within 2 weeks of it hitting the market. And if we cannot do that, we will not charge you, the owner, your first month's management fees. I should caveat that with the fact that we do require that you accept pets, because we know that many of the tenants that come into the property will likely own pets. And it also has to be a reasonable amount of rent that we are agreeing upon, so that it's not unrealistic, of course, to the point where we can't move the property itself.
Right. I think that's a really good point. And the other thing is, when that automated email goes out to the owner, most of the time the link is from Zillow, because we know that despite the fact that we publish to myriad websites, Zillow is by far the number one source of traffic that we see in terms of qualified applicants to properties that we manage. So as much as I don't like to say it, Zillow really is the be all end all for leasing or selling a property. How do we handle evictions, generally speaking?
So generally speaking, evictions are handled by professional attorneys. We are professional property managers, and we don't want to mess anything up with evictions. So we contract with a professional attorney who can help us get a tenant out quickly and in the most efficient way. So rent, as you know, is due on the 1st, and with our leases, it is laid on the 2nd. Late fees start to apply on the 3rd, and a 5-day notice to pay or quit goes out on the 5th. In the perfect world, the eviction file will be handed over to an attorney between the 10th and the 12th of the month, unless, of course, the tenant is very communicative with us and is explaining to us what the story is. An eviction should be used as a last resort, but we should also not allow any balances to be transferred and carried over into the next month. So once we've determined that a tenant needs to be evicted, we will then hand over that file to one of our attorneys in whichever market it is in, and we will let the attorney handle the eviction from start to finish. An uncontested eviction will typically take anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, and will cost anywhere from $250 to $450, maybe $500. That's for an uncontested eviction, of course.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting also that our lease says due on the 1st, late by the 2nd. So late fees start accruing on the 2nd. But because we absorb a lot of leases from other property management companies, from other independent owners, we take the lowest common denominator approach. So the vast majority of leases that we see say that there's a 5-day grace period. That's not required by law. We don't do that personally at Keyrenter. So, but in order to follow a process, we say, look, the truth is that many of the leases will say that you've got a 5-day late period, a grace period, and that they're actually, in I guess, breach of the contract on day 6. So on the 6th, we generally send them the 5-day pay or quit notice. In Arkansas, it's 3 days. And then 5 days later, which would then be the 6th plus the 5 days is the 11th or so, we start sending them to the attorneys, the files that go to the attorneys. We also have a program where we report late balances. And so it affects our tenants' credit score. If they are consistently on time with the rent payments, their credit score can be boosted by 20 to 45, 50 points. And if it's late, it shows up as late on their credit report. So anybody else pulling their credit for renting, for leasing a car or buying a car or anything else, it'll show that as a balance that's outstanding on their credit report. Let's talk for a moment as a last question about financial reports. What do we send at the end of the month? What do we send at the end of the year for tax purposes? And what does an owner do with those documents?
Sure. So from financial reporting perspective, we send out every month without fail on the last business day of the month. Of course, we'll ACH the owner the net proceeds from their assets. And they will also receive an enhanced owner statement, which is a static report that shows all of the income that has come in, minus any management fees and any maintenance and repair items that are on that report. In addition to that, any maintenance requests or expenses that are not associated to the management fees will typically also include the invoices and, of course, the work order itself with the notes by the vendor that show what was the work that actually happened, what was the work that was actually done. In addition to that, at the end of the year, every owner will receive, of course, a 1099. That is the statement that they would use to file their taxes. And we also, of course, provide an income or a cash flow statement so that they can understand what sort of expenses they've incurred throughout the year and take those expenses against their primary income. I will add that some of our owners also ask for some additional reports, and those can be automated from the system. Some of our owners want to see rent rolls, and some of our owners want to see their trust balance account reports every month. And we are more than happy to automate those through our system and send them to them at whatever cadence they prefer to receive those.
Right. But principally, the 1099 and the cash flow statement can be combined. The 1099 shows any income that Keyrenter received on their behalf for their property. So if it's $1,000 a month and 12 months were rented, it would say $12,000. And then when you marry that to the cash flow statement, the CPA can take all the expenses that were offset against the income of the property and can put that directly onto the Schedule C, Schedule E, or can create a K1 from the partnership return, the 1065 that the partnership would naturally produce. Right. So that's
correct.
Those two documents together are really the principal documents that they need to have a full picture of their tax situation for the end of the year.
Correct.
Yoni Schmidt, thank you for being on the podcast today, answering a bunch of frequently asked questions that our owners have when they're interviewing property managers, interviewing Keyrenter as a solution for their management needs. We really appreciate you being on.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
See ya.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Same Day Podcast. Tune in to a new show each week and be sure to subscribe to get future episodes.